pleasure to be here. And I truly feel honored to have the opportunity to be here and speak at this event today. As George mentioned, I'm speaking on behalf of many volunteers of two groups dealing with the issue of human trafficking from two very different yet complementary aspects. Help Us Help the Children Anti-Trafficking Initiative is a project of Children of Chernobyl Canadian Fund, and it focuses on prevention of trafficking of orphans in Ukraine. And here, locally, Stop the Trafficking Coalition works to raise awareness of the issue here in Canada, government lobbying, that type of thing. And it's really interesting to note how our experiences and knowledge gained in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and the resulting projects can in fact be tailored and adapted to what needs to be done in Canada. We're quite fortunate that the human trafficking here in Canada hasn't quite reached the epic proportions that it has in other parts of the world, as George has mentioned. But we do need to be aware of the issue, what can happen, and believe me, it is happening here in our country. So I see some familiar faces in the audience. And I want to mention that I realize we're only two of the many groups or organizations grappling with this issue and really trying to find our place and direction in this epic battle against human trafficking. And uniting all of us is a concern for this human rights tragedy and the fact that we all truly care to make a difference. And I believe that's why you're here this evening, because you truly care to make a difference. I'm not a law enforcer. George mentioned I'm a pharmacist. That's my day job. I'm not a politician or a university professor, so I'm going to allow myself to appeal to you on a more emotional level and to your sense of what is blatantly wrong and what needs to be done about it. Many of you have had the opportunity to visit our display table, and I had a chance to speak to quite a few of you who have actually read this book. Victor Mallory and Natasha's The New Global Sex Trade. It's now published internationally, I think, in about 12 different languages. And I think we're not supposed to be selling things here, but I do have a few copies available if anyone's interested. And in this book, Mallory details the tragic lives of individual women and girls from Eastern Europe ensnared in the most recent wave of the brutal sex trafficking trade. So please keep in mind that I'm speaking from the Eastern European aspect, but this really does touch and affect nations around the world. So I think many of you have had a chance to read this book, so you may find this passage, we may be familiar with what I'm going to read, and it's about Sofia, an 18-year-old Romanian who was abducted at knife point while walking home one evening on a rural road about a kilometer away from her home. She's just a young girl walking home. Two men with knives forced me into the car. I thought they would rape me and kill me. I prayed that my life would be spared. Instead, I was driven to a river crossing where they sold me to a Serbian man. He took me across the Danube River in a small boat and then to an apartment in a town in the mountains. I don't know the name, but I soon learned I was in Serbia. There were so many young girls in there. They were from Moldova, Romania, Ukraine, and Bulgaria. Some were crying. Others looked terrified. We were told not to speak to each other, not to tell each other our names or where we were from. All the time, very mean and ugly men came in and dragged girls into the rooms. Sometimes they would rape girls in front of us. They yelled at them, ordering them to move certain ways to pretend excitement to home. It was sickening. Those who resisted were beaten. If they did not cooperate, they were locked in dark cellars with rats with no food or water for 3 days. One girl refused to submit. She screamed and screamed, and we all cried. The next day, the girl tried to hang herself. Sophia's biggest fear was being broken in herself. I dreaded that moment. In the first day, I thought to myself, I will fight back. Then I saw what they did to one girl who refused. She was from Ukraine, very beautiful, very strong-willed. Two of the owners tried to force her to do things, and she refused. They beat her, burned her with cigarettes all over her arms. Still, she refused. The owners kept forcing her. She kept fighting back. They hit her with their fists, they kicked her over and over, then she went unconscious and she just lay there. And they still attacked her. She didn't move. She wasn't breathing. There was no worry on the faces of the owners. They simply carried her out. What I just read to you is fact. It's not fiction. And it's just a small example of the horrors that occur all over the world, and as mentioned by George, here in Canada as well. And it was in fact this book that was the wake-up call for many of us, specifically myself, guilty of being ignorant or oblivious to the plight endured by hundreds of thousands of enslaved victims. My goal today is to inspire you, whether you're a student, a scholar, just an individual who cares, inspire you to walk out of this presentation today with a plan in mind. What are you going to do to fight human trafficking based on the knowledge you have acquired today? Allow me now to briefly share with you some highlights of what our volunteers have accomplished, and perhaps you'll be inspired to embark on a project of your own. One of our driving forces is a belief that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. I strongly believe that law enforcers, governments, and scholars can partner with NGOs and volunteer community groups in achieving a global impact. The work of Help Us Help the Children began over a decade ago, and at the beginning phases focused on provision of medical and educational aids to over 250 orphanages in Ukraine. And at our 10th anniversary gala, Victor Mallory was the keynote speaker, and he brought to our attention how conveniently orphans fall prey to traffickers after their so-called graduation or leaving the orphanages. And this was just probably the year prior to this book coming out. And, why, orphans? Well, it's easy. No one's looking for them. They have nowhere to turn to. They have really no viable alternatives. So it was at this point that we decided to expand the focus of our activities with the creation of the Anti-Trafficking Initiative. And what we actually do is we raise awareness of the issue, not only in Ukraine, here in Canada as well. And we distributed copies of the Natashas to government officials in Canada and in Ukraine. And one of our projects was actually translation of this book in cooperation with an NGO in Ukraine into Ukrainian, so that it would be available to the population in our country. We put together learning modules about trafficking, life skills education, and we work with groups in Ukraine, the International Organization for Migration, which has a wonderful package for trainers or instructors and participants, if anyone is interested in obtaining something like that. And I believe they put together a North American version of the same. We run summer and winter camps for orphans, and we also have routes where we travel to orphanages. In fact, we just completed a route to over 60 orphanages. And what we do is we bring the training packages with us, and we train the orphanage workers, the director, and we work with the orphans themselves in warning them about what can happen to them when they leave the orphanage, and what is a legal job offer, what to watch out for. We also print this booklet. It's called Work Abroad, and I apologize, it's in Ukrainian. But what this deals with, it's really a quick course on human trafficking, legal job offers, illegal job offers, and it's got help hotline numbers around the world. And you'd be interested to know that Canada, in fact, does not have a help hotline number. In our Ministry of Justice pamphlet, Don't Become a Victim of Human Trafficking, they give 911. And of course, as many of you know from your studies, it's in fact, victim of trafficking is not going to call the police. It's in the country that they come from. It's the police that are involved in the trafficking rings.